All right, we're continuing on in our discussion of AUC sections 240 related to the considerations of fraud in a financial statement audit. And up until this point, we have discussed with management and those in charge of governance. We have assessed our risk of material misstatement due to fraud. We responded to those risks, and we've gathered evidence. And now maybe we've decided that fraud is so pervasive at the company that there's no way for us to reduce our audit risk to a reasonable level. So we decided that maybe we should discontinue our engagement. So this AUC section 240.38 explains to us the steps that we need to take if we get to that point. And it says that as a result of identified fraud or suspected fraud, then that brings into question our ability to continue performing the audit. Then we should determine the professional and legal responsibilities applicable in the circumstances. And that might be whether we are supposed to report to the person that we were engaged with or to regulatory authorities. We also need to consider whether it's appropriate for us to withdraw from the engagement in light of applicable law or regulation. So we might have a contract with this entity to perform the audit. So from a legal standpoint, are we able to withdraw and cancel our contract? And if we do withdraw from the engagement, then we need to discuss with the appropriate level of management and those charged with governance our withdrawal and the reasons for our withdrawal. And we should determine whether a professional or legal requirement exists for us to report to persons who engaged us, and maybe also to regulatory authorities. And maybe we should tell them about our withdrawal from the engagement and the reasons for why we withdrew. So we have some more information about this in the explanatory section. So let's go down there and explore more details of what we need to do when we decide to withdraw from the engagement due to fraud or suspected fraud. All right, so now we're down in the explanatory material, and this first section tells us some circumstances that might arise that would bring into question our ability to continue performing the audit as it relates to identified or suspected fraud. And the first example is that the entity doesn't take appropriate action regarding fraud that we consider necessary in the circumstances, even when the fraud is not material to the financial statement. And next, if based on our risk assessment and the audit tests that we did, we find that there's a significant risk of material and pervasive fraud, then we might determine that we want to withdraw from the engagement. Also, if there's significant concern about the competence or integrity of management or those charged with governance, we may want to withdraw. And so there's not specific list of situations that would make it to where we would want to withdraw from an engagement. It's based on, like many other things in the audit, it's based on our professional judgment. And so in light of our requirement to provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error, it's our requirement to, or rather our objective, to make sure that that is the case. And so if there's rampant and pervasive fraud throughout the entity, then it's really difficult for us to lower our audit risk to an acceptable level to a point where we are comfortable providing that opinion that there are no material misstatements. And so that might give us reason to withdraw just because we're not able to get past that inherent limitation of the audit. And also from a legal as well as a reputation standpoint of the overall firm, we don't really want to be associated with entities like that, because the risk of issuing an incorrect report is very high, and that could really have an effect on our ability to continue doing audits in the future, whether due to our licensing boards and agencies preventing us from doing so in the future, or our being sued by the stakeholders of the entities where fraud is occurring, where we don't necessarily find all the instances of fraud. So our risk with these entities from the firm's standpoint is very high. So there may be circumstances where we decide that withdrawal is the right decision to make. And having said that, if we do decide to withdraw, we have professional and legal responsibilities in the circumstances, and these vary by engagement. So in some circumstances, we might be required to report to the person who engaged us that we found the fraud and that we were withdrawing from the engagement and the reason why. And we also might need to report to regulatory authorities. And this is the case under audits of governmental entities as well as single audits and potentially other entities who are heavily regulated by certain agencies. And given how risky it is and how complex this might be, we should consider seeking legal advice when we're deciding whether to withdraw from an engagement and determining what appropriate actions we should take if we do decide to withdraw. So next here we have a little section about the specific to governmental entities and not-for-profit organizations. And it says that for governmental and not-for-profit organizations, the option of withdrawing from the engagement might not be available because of the nature of the mandate, public interest considerations, contractual requirements, or law or regulation. So when we're performing these types of entities, audits over these types of entities, we need to understand our requirements before we actually withdraw